Hello, my name is Jacob Aronauer from the law offices of Jacob Aronauer. I'm joined by Karin and Sian, paralegals in my office. And happy Friday, everybody, even though all the days are more or less now blended in. So let's go forward. It turns out we are continuing, very exciting news, to get questions from viewers of our show who want free legal advice. So we will, public has spoken, we will do that for them. So without further ado, let's get started to question one. Phil from Brooklyn asks, I'm in the process of transitioning. I've worked at a company for 10 years, have always had good reviews and a good rapport with my boss. However, my boss is a big Trump supporter, and I am afraid that when I transition, he will begin to discriminate, if not fire me outright. How do you suggest I handle it? So Sian, what would you say to Phil in this type of situation?
I would say that transgender people are protected under both New York City law and New York State law. New York City has been explicitly protecting transgender people from discrimination since 2002. And New York State passed some landmark legislation in 2019, just last year, adding gender identity explicitly as a protected class in the areas of housing, employment, and public accommodations. So I would tell him that it is not legal for his boss to discriminate against him, and that also he should be thankful he currently lives in New York, because there are not protections for transgender people yet at the federal level. There are some cases we're waiting for the Supreme Court to hand down some rulings on this topic, so we're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens, to see if transgender people might be explicitly protected under Title VII. But so far, that is not the case.
Oh, that would be a game changer. But yes, an advantage of living, a rare advantage of living in New York City.
Yep.
Karin, anything you want to add, or Sian got it?
Yep.
Okay. I would also, that's a very good breakdown of the law, Sian. And then what I would maybe add is that, you know, he fills in a little bit of a pickle in that if he doesn't say anything to his boss and then he gets fired, and then he thinks his boss fired him because he was transitioning, it may be difficult for Phil to prove that his boss actually had knowledge, as opposed to Phil, for example, writing an email to his boss, getting something on record, hey, I'm transitioning. That way he's engaged in the, quote, protected activity. Of course, then the flip side is, and he could maybe even get a lawyer to do that. Of course, that will make things very awkward at work. So that's a decision where it's sort of hard to answer just from a question, but you know, that would be a more detailed meeting that I would have with Phil to sort of figure out what's the best way to go forward on that.
Yeah, and that's such great advice, especially good to emphasize that you would want to have something in writing, not just a verbal conversation with your boss, because ideally you want evidence and a paper trail to support everything in your story of how you engaged in a protected activity as a member of a protected class. It's much more difficult for us to prove things when it's just based on oral conversations and there's no record.
Agreed. Always good to have it in writing to protect yourself. Question 2. Whiny Wendy from Westchester asks, my boss is a big meanie. He is always yelling at me, critiquing my work, and requires that I come in on time. I am only 5 to 10 minutes late every once in a while. I don't see the big deal. How would you recommend I handle my big meanie boss? Karin, what would you tell Whiny Wendy?
Well, unfortunately for you, your boss can be mean to you. That's not something that's illegal. And your boss can yell at you, also something that's not illegal. In New York, your boss could even fire you for whatever reason he wants to. Except if you think it's for a discriminatory reason. So if you are part of a protected class, so a woman, that is a protected class, or if you think that your boss is discriminating against you for your religion or ethnicity or your race, then his treatment of you might be something that is not that's not okay. But it really is going to depend on the situation.
Right, and like I use a term in the office called peel that onion. So let's see, trying to see if there's anything else there. I agree with what Karin's saying, that on the face, it sounds like a tough boss. It sounds like an unpleasant work situation, but, what are you going to do? There's nothing you really can do. But let's say Wendy was the only woman in the office and there were 5 guys there and all the guys were late all the time and her boss didn't care. Or let's say, for example, Wendy just became pregnant. And then that's when all this started to happen. And Wendy didn't tell us that. I mean, I would say it's not unusual where I have to kind of probe potential clients to get more information, and then it turns out there's something there. But whiny Wendy, I would say on the face, sorry, stop whining. Sean, anything I missed or?
No, I mean, just to expand on that, if, for example, Wendy's boss was always saying things like, women, they're just always late. I can never depend on them. Women are so terrible. Then possibly that would be helpful in building a case. But you can't just have a feeling that your boss doesn't like you because you're a woman. It needs to be based in evidence.
Correct. That would be very strong evidence. I would agree. Okay, we have one last question. And very unusual fact pattern. Okay, here we go. Ronaldo from the Bronx asks, I am a bartender at a gay bar in the West Village. I am the only straight bartender. The other bartenders get more favorable working conditions, such as they get to work on the weekends. I guess that means, get better tips because there's more action on the weekends. Can leave early for personal stuff. And I think they have been giving me a hard time because I am supporting Trump, another Trump issue. Also, I know for a fact that the owner receives all of the credit card tips. Exclamation point. That is not fair. Another exclamation point. Okay, so I'm going to take this one with the exception of the Trump stuff because the political area is now your specialty, Sean. So I would probably, looking just from what Ronaldo's telling me, with respect to the more favorable working conditions, that's probably something I frankly, so I assume I would be doing it on a contingency, not something I'd want to get involved in because it would be harder for me to find tangible damages. The only thing I think in theory I could find in terms of trying to find some type of damage would be that if the gay bartenders are getting to work on the weekends, presumably that means they're making more money and that's not fair. And then not that it's not fair, but he could have something there. But being able to leave early, that's tough luck again. Not something I think even the very liberal New York City human rights law would find actionable. With respect to the credit card tips, that's a complicated question. If the owner says, for example, on the menu or in a big sign in the bar, tips go to management, they're allowed to keep them. If the patrons, if that sign or notification was not there, and the patrons thought that when they were leaving tips, it was going to the staff, then he could potentially have a good claim under the New York labor law. Sean, what about the Trump situation? The straight Ronaldo who's a Trump supporter working in a gay bar. Is there anything he can do?
Well, unfortunately, no. New York law protects against a discrimination based on political activity. For example, if you attended a political rally outside of work hours, or if you were canvassing for a political candidate outside of work hours, but it does not protect against discrimination based on political affiliation. So, unfortunately, that it's not covered. Interestingly, New York law also protects against discrimination based on recreational activities. So, for example, if he were in a political argument outside of work with somebody, he couldn't be fired for that. But at work, he can be fired because he's a Trump supporter. That is not illegal. That might not be the case if he worked for a governmental organization. Governmental organizations are prohibited under the First Amendment from discriminating based on political speech or beliefs. But because he's working for a private organization, that's not the case.
Tough luck, Ronaldo. Karin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just going back to the tips. If your boss is taking the tip credit for your hourly wage, he needs to make sure that the rest of the minimum wage, $15 in New York, is made up by your tips. So you need to be making at least $15 an hour as a combination of what your boss pays you plus your tips. Yeah.
Well, excellent point. That would be something that we should ask Ronaldo if we had a preliminary conference with him. So very good pickup, Karin. Okay, so those were the 3 questions we had for today. Hopefully we'll have more questions to answer next week. Thank you. Have a great weekend.